Hi there. This was a public presentation I made last week to members of TERRE, Toronto East Residents for Renewable Energy, a grassroots group aiming to shutter the Dirty Portland's gas plant on Toronto's waterfront by 2030 and replace it with clean, low-cost, reliable, renewable energy and storage. I work for a small but mighty NGO called the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. We were formed in 1997 to call for a coal phase out in Ontario. It took 17 years, but we won. We then turned our attention to moving Ontario to 100% renewable energy future, which would preclude any new investments in nuclear or gas. Prior to the 2018 provincial election, in Ontario, the Ontario Liberal government invested massively in wind, solar, and conservation, such that to this day, Ontario has more wind and solar power than any other Canadian province. They had completely phased out coal and they'd reduced reliance on gas power to just 4% of our grid. Then Doug Ford was elected with a majority government in 2018 on a promise to kill green energy. He did not disappoint his supporters. He immediately canceled 758 renewable energy projects, even ripping out 2 existing wind farms, costing Ontario taxpayers more than $200 million in court fees, and he cut the conservation budget by 60%. Then he moved to ramp up nuclear and gas. Ontario is now embarking on the largest nuclear build-out in the world. Dr. Mark Winfield from York University estimates this will cost taxpayers $400 billion. This is Doug Ford's electricity plan. Nuclear to increase from 48 to 75%, and renewables, that's wind, water, and solar, set to decline from 35% today to just 25%. We are going in the wrong direction. Who benefits from Doug Ford's energy plan? Well, 5 giant corporations. Enbridge Gas has a monopoly on gas distribution throughout the province. OPG, or Ontario Power Generation, our publicly owned utility, operates nuclear and gas projects around the province. Bruce Power manages the Bruce Nuclear Station, currently the largest nuke station in the world. TC Energy owns and operates oil and gas pipelines, and Cameco mines uranium. Canada is the second largest exporter of uranium in the world. Since being elected, the Ford government has quadrupled the use of gas for electricity generation, and it will rise to a quarter of our electricity in just 5 years. This amidst a global climate crisis where the world's climate scientists have declared we need to cut fossil fuel emissions in half by 2030. Besides being a very serious climate emitter, gas combustion causes smog. And gas jeopardizes our national security. Already, we get 70% of our gas from the US, most of which is extra polluting fracked gas. Why make us more reliant to the whims of erratic US leaders? So how does Ontario compare with Quebec? Well, Hydro-Quebec is planning to meet 100% of its future electricity needs by investing in energy efficiency, renewables, and storage. Low-cost, clean energy. Why would Doug Ford bet on nuclear and gas? Well, I guess he's beholden to those very large corporations rather than us taxpayers or the environment. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is going in a different direction. Last year, 92% of all the world's power capacity added to the grid came from renewables, almost all of that wind and solar. And that's up 15% from the previous year. That's 585 gigawatts of new power capacity was added from renewables last year alone, while we also saw a decrease in non-renewable energy investments like nuclear or fossil gas. This is evidence that renewables are economically viable and readily deployable. Each year they keep breaking their own expansion records. This graph shows the rise of solar power capacity installed around the world, and it's growing exponentially. 440 gigawatts of solar were installed in 2023. That's triple Canada's entire grid, which took us more than 100 years to build out. But we do things differently in Ontario. Our first nuclear new build in 4 decades will take place just east of Toronto at the existing Darlington nuclear station. Ford plans to build up to 4 SMRs, or small modular nuclear reactors. They've never been built before. They promise to be exorbitantly expensive. There will be no environmental assessment, and they'll take many years to build, during which time they'll be burning more and more dirty gas. To top it off, they're a US technology and will require us to import enriched uranium fuel from the US for the lifetime of the reactors. So we launched a campaign to tell the Ford government and OPG to rip up its contract with US-based GE-Hitachi. So we did some polling in May of this year to see if Ontarians were with us. No surprise, the people of Ontario overwhelmingly oppose building American-designed reactors at the Darlington nuclear station and much prefer lower cost and more secure solar and wind energy. 80% of those polls said cancel the contract for the GE-Hitachi reactors, 70% saying that wind and solar are better choices. 2/3 of Ontarians think we should be developing wind power projects in the Great Lakes. Expanding our electricity connections with neighbors in Manitoba and Quebec is a complete no-brainer, with 88% of Ontarians in favor. And 72% think our electric utilities should provide no money down, zero interest financing for the installation of electric heat pumps to make it easier for Ontarians to reduce their use of American gas for home heating. Let's talk about cost. Nuclear is the most expensive option. Power from new reactors will cost up to 8 times more than onshore wind farms, 6 times more than solar farms, and 2.7 times more than Great Lakes offshore wind power. Check out this chart of Ontario's electricity options. Our most expensive electricity options are new nuclear and gas. Conservation, renewables, and storage are a fraction of the cost. In other words, investing in conservation water power and storage imports from Quebec and offshore and onshore wind and solar power would save Ontarians tens of billions of dollars. In May of 2023, Ontario's Independent Electricity System Operator, or the IESO, announced that it's awarding a contract to OPG to increase the capacity of its Portland's gas plant on the Toronto waterfront by 50 megawatts, so up from 550 to 600. So that summer we hosted a community meeting out near the plant to build opposition to this plan. And this is where TERRE, this group, Toronto East Residents for Renewable Energy, was formed. Toronto City Council twice voted no to expansion of this gas plant on their waterfront. They also called for a provincial environmental assessment of the plant. But OPG and the Ford government continued to ignore their concerns. Then in June of last year, Toronto City Council passed a motion calling on the IESO and Toronto Hydro to work together to develop a plan to phase out the polluting Portland's gas plant by 2035 and ramp up renewables and efficiency. And they are now, the IESO and Toronto Hydro are developing a new 20-year power plan for the city called the Integrated Regional Resource Plan, or IRRP. This is Toronto's chance to focus on building a modern, efficient, zero-carbon electricity system. So we need to build public support for the City of Toronto's request that this plan rapidly increase local renewable energy and storage. So we're still waiting for the IESO's achievable potential study. with respect to how to the potential for Toronto's energy efficiency, demand management, local renewables, and storage options. It was expected the first quarter of this year. But in the meantime, on June 4th, the government issued a news release saying they're planning a third line to bring nuclear power into Toronto from Pickering and Darlington. After all, OPG will need customers for its high-cost nuclear power. Previous governments also proposed a third line to bring more power into Toronto, but they always met fierce opposition from citizens in Toronto. We are starting to build a campaign, but also we would support a third line, but only if it was to bring renewable offshore wind power from Lake Ontario. So let's look at offshore wind power and the potential. So using data in a study commissioned by the Ontario Power Authority, we calculated that wind farms located at 64 sites in the Great Lakes could produce more than 100% of Ontario's current electricity needs. The costs today would be 40 to 60% lower than the cost of new reactors. Offshore wind power projects can be built in 3 years and produce no high-level radioactive waste. That would be a fraction of the time that it takes to build nuclear reactors, allowing for rapid action on climate that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, has urgently called for. In February 2011, just to go back a bit and give you some context, in response to waterfront residents who were opposed to potential offshore wind farm 2 to 4 kilometers from the Scarborough Bluffs in Toronto, former Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty imposed a moratorium on offshore wind projects. So it's time for Premier Ford to rescind that moratorium and allow Great Lakes wind power projects to proceed, subject, of course, to environmental assessment reviews that demonstrate that their potential adverse impacts have been minimized. According to the National Audubon Society, one of the oldest and most effective bird conservation organizations in the Western Hemisphere, quote, 2/3 of bird species in North America will face extinction unless we tackle climate change. As a result, Audubon supports environmentally appropriate offshore wind projects. And why are we shining with solar? Toronto could meet 50 to 80% of its total electricity needs by tapping the power of the sun. Solar panels on parking lots, schools, community centers, and other buildings could produce 6 to 9 times more power than the polluting Portland's gas plant. To tap into this tremendous potential for zero carbon power, we need to pay residents and businesses a fair price for solar generation and clear away red tape holding solar power back in places like parking lots. Converting just half the area of Toronto's 7,000 large open-air parking lots with solar panels would produce more than 2.5 times the power currently coming from burning fossil gas at the Portland's plant on the city's waterfront. And yes, renewables require storage. Fortunately, there are many ways to store power, from stationary batteries to EV bidirectional batteries to coordination with Quebec, which has massive surplus storage capacity available. And Quebec also has massive surplus generation capacity available for export during the summer months when Ontario's demand peaks. And we have huge untapped potential to reduce energy demand, which is a fraction of the cost and impact of producing supply. Even the Royal Bank, which is Canada's largest banker of fossil fuels, says that Ontario could save $500 million every year by investing in energy efficiency and load shifting rather than building gas plants. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, comprised of thousands of climate scientists around the world, says we need to reduce global climate emissions in half by 2030. Solar and wind can help, as they take 1 to 3 years to build out. Nuclear reactors take 10 to 15 years or more. And as is in the case with Ontario, they're ramping up climate damaging gas as they build out those nukes. If we believe that the climate is changing and fossil fuels are the primary cause, then we must transition rapidly to renewables. Manitoba and Quebec have the lowest electricity rates in Canada because they're primarily powered with water power. Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador have huge untapped wind power potential. If we want to reduce our dependence on dirty, imported American gas and high cost and high risk American nuclear technology, we should work with our fellow provinces to create an efficient, resilient, renewable east west electricity system that makes the most of our strengths right here in Canada. So please check out our website. That was a lot of information. Reach out to me with any questions or comments. I'll leave a bunch of links below of our reports, etc., for further reference. And thank you for your time today. Here's to a renewable future.